pleasure here at Frontier Africa Reports to speak with the President and Chief Executive Officer of a Corporate Council on Africa, Liser, out of Washington. Thank you very much for coming through with us.
Well, son, thank you for having me.
We appreciate all that you are doing for Africa over many years at the Corporate Council on Africa. So, give us a very brief overview of what the CCA is doing with the U.S. government in engaging African leaders around this COVID-19 pandemic.
So, first of all, I think that just to say that Corporate Council on Africa for our 28 years of existence has really been a premier U.S. business association focused on promoting trade, economic development, and business engagement between the United States and Africa. And we're very proud to say that we have members of CCA that are both U.S. and African companies and are multinationals as well as SMEs. And we think that that gives us a unique ability to bring together the players, both government as well as private sector, to focus on how we can enhance the U.S.-Africa economic and commercial relationship. And so right now, we're turning from a place where African economies were doing so well. We had predictions from the IMF that growth would be 5, 6, 8% for some of those countries, some of the fastest growing economies in the world. And now, because of COVID-19, we have seen both the health impact, but also the economic impact in Africa has been tremendous. Governments having to shut down their borders, the impact on tourism, and just the ability to do business every day. And so I was very pleased to see that the African Union has appointed some envoys. We'll have some of them in our leaders forum coming up over the next 4 days. And I'd like to share more about that. But before we even get to that, we put on a series at CCA, a webinar series on navigating the impact of COVID-19. And we were able to get leaders from both the private sector and government to come, and multilateral institutions to come and talk about the fact that more than ever, now more than ever, we needed a collaborative approach, working together, the Africans working together, as well as the United States private sector and government. And we were able to feature people from the African CDC, the head of the African Development Bank, Afrexim Bank, the head of the U.S. Export-Import Bank, and the New Development Finance Corporation. We brought all of these people together over the course of about 2 months. We started in April. And so we had a lot of really good discussions about what needed to happen, both on the health side and the economic side. And just as an example, we had a call where a number of our CCA members in the health sector, we've got companies like Pfizer and Gilead and GE Healthcare, Johnson & Johnson, that are members of CCA. And we are pleased that a number of them, and even companies that are not particularly in the healthcare sector, have been providing equipment. They've been looking into things like vaccines, testing, and so, this is something that's important. Even companies like Medtronics, which is a member of CCA, looking at equipment that could be provided, ventilators, etc. So again, our role is to convene all of the key people and stakeholders. And I believe that we've done a good job thus far in terms of bringing people together to focus on COVID-19. But if I could just say, this leaders forum that we're having this week, Tuesday through Friday, is our way of elevating the discussion to another level. And that's why we called it a leaders forum. We would have been in Marrakesh, Morocco, having our U.S.-Africa Business Summit a few weeks ago. And unfortunately, we had to postpone it. We will still be having it in Morocco, but we just don't know the new date yet. But we thought we cannot wait until we can all convene in person again. We have to do something to get leaders looking at what the issues are. And so we're focused on resilience, on building a U.S.-Africa resilient business relationship post-COVID. And we're looking forward, as I said, to hosting some heads of state. We have 4 that have committed thus far. President Kagame of Rwanda, President Nyusi of Mozambique, President Kenyatta of Kenya, and President Akufo-Addo of Ghana have committed. And we're hoping that His Excellency Vice President Osinbajo will join us one of those days as well. We haven't heard back yet, but we're still crossing our fingers and sending up prayers that he'll join us.
Yeah, you were in Nigeria around April of last year. In Nigeria, you met with Nigeria's Vice President, Professor Yomi Osinbajo, and I'm sure he's someone who is very keen about U.S.-Africa relations, U.S.-Nigeria relations, how to improve bilateral trade, development through the various U.S. agencies on Nigeria's space, like USAID and the rest of them. Before the pandemic, Flory, it was all about trade with the Trump administration in the U.S., the global trades, the changing a game of existing global trade, whether it was NAFTA or with Mexico and with the European and others in Africa as well, even though we still have the Africa's trade deal, AGOA with Africa there, although it's ramping up now in terms of number of years, getting to the end of it, we're talking about whether it's AGOA 2.0. So before the pandemic, it was all about trade. Is trade, investment and development still very key within this COVID-19 and raising it to a different new level? What will be the new game changer, new level of engagement with African private sector and leaders under this COVID-19 when it comes to trade, in particular intra-African trade, Pan-African trade, and Africa and the rest of the world?
So I think that's an excellent question. I think that COVID-19 has actually revealed for us a number of the weaknesses in the value chains globally. We're seeing that there's a need to diversify where companies are producing products. I think that this is an opportunity actually to look at how Africa can actually play a bigger role in manufacturing the products that are needed in the global trading system. And, you know, we shouldn't have all the products coming from only certain parts of the world and certain countries of the world. We need to diversify. And I think companies are looking at that carefully. I think that the other thing that companies are looking at in terms of new opportunities is the fact that the African Continental Free Trade Area will actually open up the largest free trade market in the world. This will be the largest free trade zone ever, and bringing together 54 African countries into one market that will operate effectively and efficiently. Because right now, I think you realize with 54 countries and many of them small and landlocked, you know, very fragmented, very difficult to decide, do I invest here? Do I invest there? If I come to Nigeria, will I have access to other countries in West Africa? How will that work? And I think that both the realization that there is a new opportunity to diversify supply chains and global production of key products, and the fact that AFCFTA is coming into play, is the two of those coming together at this point, I think really provides for some excellent new opportunities to build on AGOA and to go beyond AGOA.
So when we talk about, go back to healthcare a little bit, what type of commitments would you like to see from African leaders at this conference that you want to extract from them? I think the U.S. government and the U.S. private sector would like to extract from African leaders to make
Well,
these developments like EFCFTA not just a fire brigade work, but something sustainable that will help Africa ramp up on some of the developments we've seen in recent years, but again, to use the COVID-19 as a template of how to do things on a sustainable level moving forward. Flori.
well, I think that first of all, we should give the African continent credit for the fact that it has come together as the AU to put together a game plan for how to address COVID-19. I think there was a realization that every country can't be going for itself, that this was not the kind of challenge that could be handled by individual countries one at a time. And so, we heard from Prime Minister Abiy of Ethiopia. We heard from President Ramaphosa of South Africa in his capacity as AU chair, that really there had to be a cohesive, collaborative approach to fighting this pandemic. And then looking at the Africa CDC, working with the World Health Organization, and having, I think they assigned 4 envoys that would look at both what needed to happen on the health side as well as what needed to happen on the economic side, and then taking that message to the G7, the G20, to the IMF, the World Bank, and to bilateral partners like the United States. And I know that the U.S. has done through AID, particularly quite a bit in terms of supporting, and the State Department, in terms of supporting, I believe, more than 40 countries on the continent, specifically with valuable support, financial support, focused on health. I think just the point you mentioned, extracting from heads of state, I really give them credit. No one needs to extract from them. They've made commitments to provide a certain amount of GDP to health. And some of the countries have met that goal. Others are still working on it. But I think that we should give them credit that they recognize that health is critical, health infrastructure is important, and that when you have a pandemic like COVID-19, as was the case with Ebola, you see the fragility of African healthcare systems. And this is another opportunity, I think, for heads of state and for their partners around the world, both private sector and government, to work to strengthen Africa's healthcare systems. And that's an area that CCA is actually working on, because we have a number of healthcare members in the healthcare sector, I should say. And so we are definitely bringing all of them together, as well as government partners and others, so that we can talk about that longer term vision you mentioned. So critical that we not just do it as a response to a pandemic, but that we look at it as systemic things that need to happen over the long term.
So when you sit down in Washington, Flori, and you see what certain some multilateral agencies, DFIs within the continents doing the AFDB, the Afrexim Bank promoting the AFCFTA, and a few others, what further handshake are you looking to see between these agencies on the continent and from the World Bank, from the Bretton Woods institutions, and the private sector arm of the World Bank, for example, MIGA, the IFC, and others, that you'll be able to facilitate as the Corporate Council on Africa to get more funding that are seriously needed in those very key areas that's been identified, bridging inequality, getting women, girls into schools in Africa, more healthcare at the basic primary healthcare level, and all of that?
Well, I think that we have to look at measures that are both on the African side and on the U.S. side. So again, we commend that the African CDC has been established. We know that U.S. CDC was a partner and helpful in the early discussions of that. That's important that Africa have its own CDC and working across the continent. On the US side, as I said, there have been a number of initiatives. I was really impressed about 2 weeks ago, the new Development Finance Corporation of the US, the DFC, which used to be OPIC, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, launched a new initiative that is focused on the health sector and has a call out now to get proposals for how companies, private sector companies, can leverage their resources with the resources of DFC and the US government to actually address health systems fragility, not just in Africa. They're looking at all developing countries, of course. We at CCA are focused on Africa, but we think that this is an opportunity for private sector to come together with government, both on the US side, but also working on the African side, to specifically look at healthcare systems in Africa.
So if you look at what your CCA has done over the years, what's the new level here for you on the African continent when you look at where we are at the moment? Do you see COVID-19 flurry as the, I want to say it's a pandemic, but I want to say, use the word very carefully, a game changer for Africa to change things, to have a 360 turnaround, as it were, and balance its interests between the West and the Eastern powers of the global economic and political space?
Well, I'm one of the ones that thinks that, the opportunities in Africa are so tremendous. And, with the AFCFTA, just as an example, we're looking at consumer purchases growing in Africa by 70% a year over the next 10 years, and possibly as high as $6.7 trillion. So we see these opportunities in Africa as important, and essentially it's really up to companies now to see what is going to be the best way to take advantage of those opportunities. COVID just basically opens our eyes more to the fact that we need to move quickly. We need to move with a vision for how we can engage with Africa. And I think the U.S. has it. We've got Prosper Africa as an initiative that's focused on the continent and on helping. It's a whole of government, bringing all the agencies that do different things in Africa all together on the same page to support private sector companies that are investing in Africa. And I think investment is still the key. Trade is critical as an engine for economic growth in Africa. Africa still accounts for only 3% of all world trade. So there's clearly a lot of room, but it is a critical driver. No country in the world has ever become a developed economy without trade. And so this is, I think, Africa's time to be sort of the world's manufacturing floor, and to not just be shipping raw commodities out of Africa to other places where the value is added and then shipped back to Africa as final products. This is a time to look at promoting value addition in Africa. And with 5 years left for AGOA, I think that's good, but then we need to look at new things that we can do. So I'm excited about the US-Kenya free trade agreement and the fact that it will serve as a model for what the United States can do with Africa and its African partners beyond unilateral preferences like AGOA.
So, Flori, what about debt? Sustainability and discussions with the G20 on one hand, with the multilateral agencies in the US. Then you talk about the Eastern powers, China and others on the other hand. How do you think Africa can balance its interests here in its own interest?
Well, one of the things I should have mentioned earlier is that there's so much happening in Africa, so much opportunity. They have to partner with a range of people. I don't think Africa has the luxury of deciding that it will only partner with this group of countries or that group of countries. And I think that most countries and our private sectors are very clear that they are going to Africa because of the opportunities that are there. And the fact that other companies are there, that's good. It shows that we're not alone. U.S. companies are not alone in seeing, what Africa has to offer. So we see European competitors there. We see Chinese competitors there. We see competitors from India and Brazil and, other places from around the world. Our companies are not afraid of competition. So they're there because it's about business, and Africa offers business opportunities. I think for the Africans from their side, perhaps they're balancing what are the different things that they can do with different countries. So like right now on the debt, you asked on debt. Debt for Africa is structured quite differently now than back when we had the HIPC debt forgiveness. Quite a bit of Africa's debt currently is commercial debt, and quite a bit of that is with China. So even when you talk about debt restructuring and debt forgiveness, there's a different role that different countries play. The United States is not one of the holders of large portions of African debt. But it doesn't mean that we can't sit down with our African partners and look at what are some of the things that can be done in the interim, along with the G7, the World Bank, and others to support them. And so I do believe that our government agencies are looking at that. And then the private sector, as I said, private sector driven growth is always going to be better than if you rely solely on government. And I think many African governments now are pulling out of, directing the economy, keeping a thumb on the private sector, and much more looking at the private sector as a partner with them who can leverage what the government is doing. And now you see many more of these public-private partnerships that have developed on the continent. So I think, again, this is a great time and great moment for us to sort of pivot and see what else can we do together collectively.
Great. On a final note, Flora, it's been interesting speaking with you. What will be the kernel or the focus of your opening speech tomorrow when this 3-day conference opens, and what do you think will be your final words will be on Friday?
Good question. So the focus of our Leaders Forum, which can't take the place of what we would have done in Marrakesh, but is our effort to continue to provide the access and the connections and the insights that people need to be successful in doing business on the continent. And I think what we will focus on is resilience, that this is a time where we're looking on some days at innovations, health and economic innovations. We're looking at the financial response to COVID-19 and Africa's needs. The last day, we're looking at trade, and we even have a number of people who will be, for example, the Secretary General of the new African Continental Free Trade Area will be joining us that day as well. But I think that the message that I will bring tomorrow is that Africa is resilient, that the U.S.-Africa relationship, historic as well as economic, is a long-standing one and will continue as we go forward, that we stand ready as partners to Africa. Corporate Council on Africa will continue to play our role in promoting that kind of engagement and partnership. We believe greatly in Africa, and the message I hope will come out over the 4 days is that Africa is ready to also recover. Recovery, economic recovery is something that will be critical. And I hope that what we can say at the end of the 4 days is that we have talked about some of the ways that we can partner to ensure economic recovery in Africa and to build on the resilience that we know that Africa has had as a continent, as a people. Even here in the United States, the sons and daughters of Africa have been resilient. And we just feel that we want to make sure that that partnership continues going forward, that we remain resilient and we remain visionary about how we come together and recover from this pandemic, and perhaps look at some new ways to make ourselves even stronger in that relationship. U.S.-Africa is, I think, on a good path.
Thank you very much, Florizelle, the President and CEO of Corporate Council on Africa. We appreciate what the Council has been doing. I followed very closely the CCA activities between Africa and the United States over the last 17 years during the days of African Securities Market roadshows in the United States across a number of cities where Stephen Hayes was the head of the council. Now that you're in charge, we appreciate carrying on the good leadership at the Corporate Council on Africa, and we will give you all our best and support as you engage US and Africa from tomorrow, Tuesday, to the end of the week. We look forward to speaking with you here on Frontier Africa at the end of the conference, maybe sometime next week, for the major takeaways of this very important conference. Thank you so much, Liser.
Thank you to Frontier Africa.
Have a great day and wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you.